we have a distinguished group in our panel discussion. And I'll start with Deborah Smith, the CEO of Seattle City Light, basically the largest public utility in the region, and a big customer for the Bonneville Power Administration for the power from the federal dams. We have Sam White from the Pacific Northwest Farmers Cooperative, the shippers for much of the grain that comes out of the Palouse in North Idaho, and he grew up on a grain farm himself, so he knows the business. David Reeploeg is the vice president of Tri-City Development Council. They are essentially the economic development organization for the Tri-Cities and the area around where the Columbia and Snake come together. And David has been with us before, as had Sam. Also, we have Chris Wood, the CEO of Trout Unlimited, another alumnus of the first Energy, Salmon, Agriculture, and Community Conference. And finally, we have one of my colleagues, Lynda Mapes, who's been covering this issue just by storm for several years, and is from the Seattle Times, award winner, author. And so I want to get started here right away, giving folks a little chance to talk about the issues they think we should be exploring. And Deborah, you weren't here the last time, but you've been involved in a whole lot of the different forums and efforts that have been going on since. Talk about that and where you think we should be going with it.
Thanks, Rocky. No, I actually feel like missing 2 years ago was a great miss on my part, and I'm sorry that I wasn't there because I've heard so much about what a lively conversation it was. So I've been in this industry for 25 years. I was actually thinking this morning, I don't know what has aged me more in the last year and a half, COVID or fish issues, but they're probably both right up there. When I started in this industry, I was kind of mid-career. I went to work for the Eugene Water and Electric Board in Eugene, and I was a staff accountant. And we were EWEB had put forth, they'd had developed, issued bonds back in must have been the 90s. And the purpose was to invest in renewable power. The board had a commitment to serve all new load with either energy efficiency or renewable power. And so I'm this new staff accountant, and I come from the private sector where everything is profit and bottom line. And one of my first tasks was to work on the initial accounting structure for some of these projects, including Foot Creek Wind, which in Wyoming, which was EWEB's first investment in a wind project. And when it was all done, you commission these projects, and so then everybody gets pictures and with the date and all. And I had one of those that was on my office wall for many, many years, because as someone new to the industry, it was a great reminder that I worked in an industry and for a utility that was happily willing and had a customer base that was willing to pay more for renewable resource because it was the right thing to do. And so, today we know a lot more about that 25 years later. I mean, I think, first of all, wind power has gone crazy places, but I think we understand a lot more that the life cycle cost of resources is something other than what plugs into your financial statements. So, I spent about 4 years co-chairing or chairing the Public Power Council's Fish and Wildlife Committee. And then I moved to Seattle and chaired the PPC and yes, got involved in a lot of conversations about 2 years ago when we were contemplating the draft EIS and how that was going to land. And a bunch of us started getting together, and it was on the power side. We were having conversations. the initial purpose was to say, hey, this doesn't work. I had spent a couple of years on the board of Northwest River Partners when I was at Central Lincoln PD. And, there was this sense that we were in this litigation, we were the mice on the treadmill, on the litigation treadmill. And what would it take to forge a different future? And it was clear that it was going to take a lot of conversation, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of commitment to hearing other perspectives. And I want to be clear that there were efforts like that had gone on before. The Columbia Basin work, which actually, I think in many ways begot the new Columbia Basin Cooperative that's being stood up right now by the 4 states and the tribes. And so, we knew that conversation was possible, but we knew that it was really hard. And I guess what I want to say, because I just have these few minutes here at the front, is when we were in the midst of these conversations, the thing that was most important, and at that point it was essentially power, although we did have some participation from the Lewiston port, it was essentially power and a number of our environmental friends. And we spent months together, talking, eventually asking the 4 governors to consider solutions that would prevent future litigation. The conversations got really hard, and they kind of ended right at the time that the plans for the Columbia Basin Cooperative were initially launched. And then when Congressman Simpson's proposal really came about, that was a really exciting and interesting opportunity to think about. When we were in the room having conversations, what wasn't there was a 4-H or an all-H place to have those conversations, nor did we have all the players. We had power, we had fish folks, Trout Unlimited, et cetera, but we didn't have ag or navigation or transportation or the ports. So we were clear that in order for this to go anywhere, it was going to need to be a comprehensive solution with all voices at the table. What I loved when Congressman Simpson's proposal first landed was that it was comprehensive, that it did create a space for all the folks that are impacted by the dams, but also by the declining fish populations. It was a place where all the interests would be represented. And I liked the fact that it was really empowering. So it was, it's not about, well, here's some money, let me throw money at you. It was more like, we can't solve everybody's problems because the people that are experiencing them have to be the ones to develop solutions to the problems. And I really believe that's true. And I believe that the conversation can and should continue with the Columbia Basin Cooperative. And I believe that if nothing else, and we've already heard, this is a really heavy lift legislatively, et cetera. If nothing else, I would love to see the process, the work that Congressman Simpson and Blumenauer now and others have done. I would love to see that result in at least funding for the Columbia Basin Cooperative so that those conversations can really happen in a way that provides some degree of possible success. So I think I'll stop there, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to be part of this conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. So, Sam, when you were here 2 years ago, you were kind of right there as Congressman Simpson brought up the what if question, and it still kind of hangs out there over this issue. And I even had a question on from this group. So, how are we going to ship grain how are we going to ship grain at the same price, or if we don't have the barging? And that issue, Simpson's only kind of generally had, but there hasn't been any really discussion if that's even an issue, a way that we can talk about this. Talk about the challenge of that, Sam.
All right. Thank you, Rocky, and other panel members. Thank you. I appreciate the time and the ability, the chance to speak today. As Deborah mentioned, this is a subject that is It's been going on for a number of years. There's a lot of issues that we're all trying to understand and figure out, and none of them are easy. And I think most of the people at the table and the group that I represent, the farmers in the Pacific Northwest, are some of the biggest conservationists that you would ever find. But yet they still, bottom end of the day, that, they have to make a living on their farm. We're just one company up here in northern Idaho that uses the river system to move part of our product. We don't use the river for 100% of our product. We do have a unit train loader in eastern Washington that we own, that we also use. So we're using multiple modes of transportation to get our product to the West Coast. If you're not familiar with it, most of it travels down the river system or down the rail system to, in our case, where we're raising mostly wheat and legumes here, it's going either to the Portland, Vancouver market. Some of our legumes go into the Seattle, Tacoma market into containers, and that's more truck rail business there. But we do use the river system for a lot of wheat. And again, that we're kind of up at the end of the pool at Lewiston. And it's a very efficient way for us to move grain. We as I mentioned earlier, we do have a unit train loading facility. Works very well. There's no doubt about it. This past year, the Pacific Northwest, have not seen all the final numbers, but I feel very confident in saying that we had a record crop of wheat this past year. Just, the stars and moon, everything aligned. The weather was perfect. Just huge yields. So I think many farmers set personal records. So there was a lot of product to move. We're still moving it now, getting ready for the 2021 harvest that will start coming off the Palouse in parts of July and more into August. Still trying to get everything emptied out. A big portion of our product is sold overseas to Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Philippines, China, Southeast Asia, a lot of those markets, Yemen, Indonesia, just a lot of our product moves that direction. So that's why we're very dependent upon river and rail. What we see today is, with this big crop that we just moved, it would be hard for us to solely rely on one or the other. It's, the infrastructure is not there today to move it all by one or the other. And there's I'm going to say a half a dozen rail terminals in the Northwest that were not here 20 years ago. So it has been building, but so have our yields. Our yields continue to increase. Our market share increases. It's a constant need to move product, and it moves throughout the year. There are a few times during the year, usually once for certain, that the Corps of Engineers has a closure of the river system where they do lock maintenance, and we all try to plan around that and move more than by rail, but it comes from planning. But to just stop it would be very hard for us. It's a vital part of our system, but I think we're willing to sit down at the table and discuss these issues. The fish are very important, and we want to try and figure out ways that we can keep these runs going. And I know that they've done a lot of different items to the dams and fish ladders and different weirs to try and make it better, and it's still a struggle. Talking to some of the different groups, they're not getting the numbers that they like to see yet. I think our industry is still willing to support those. I'm a simple guy. I look at simple things, and I get frustrated at times, and wonder why haven't we tried this, and why haven't we tried that? And so we have been in discussions on I want to say maybe a smaller level, more personal level, still just within the last month, talking to individuals from different Trout Unlimited and different groups about the constant problems that they're facing and how we can work forward with that. I guess I'm here today to say the river is a very vital system to the farmers in the Northwest. I don't think we can just today that, there's infrastructure issues in moving that much rail to get it all done. Even if there was a rail that ran up and down the Snake and Columbia River system, that's a very crowded track today. So, we don't have it all figured out. But technology's gaining every day in many aspects of our lives. Maybe something's around the corner that we're not aware of. We just hope that technology will come soon enough that this works out for all of us. But again, I appreciate the time here. I think we're all very passionate about these issues, and I think it's important that we just sit down and try to work together to work it out where everybody's happy. So thank you, Rocky.
Thank you, Sam, for coming back and joining us again. David, you were here before. You sat through and pondered this issue quite a bit. In a lot of ways, the Tri-Cities are right at the heart of this. And these discussions are going on. Talk about, where these things, is there a what if question going on in the Tri-Cities? Or I don't hear a lot of it, but I miss a lot of things. What do you think? How is this regional discussion going in terms of your community?
Well, good morning, Rocky, and good morning, everybody else. I appreciate you all having me back here for the second time around, and I appreciate this opportunity to continue the conversation, a really important conversation. And, I am here as an employee of the Tri-City Development Council, which is the economic development organization in the Tri-City area. And I maybe say, wearing that hat, that I think we would like to be even more involved in the conversation. I think there's a lot of groups that are involved in conversations that I think the Tri-Cities would like to have more of a voice on. But I'm also here, I think, representing the sentiments of a lot of communities, industries throughout the Pacific Northwest that are deeply impacted by the dams in a very positive way, but are also deeply committed to preserving our salmon throughout the Pacific Northwest. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on the many conversations about salmon and dams in the Pacific Northwest. And one thing that strikes me is that for every point, there is a counterpoint. Someone might say that the salmon numbers are terrible on the Snake River, and then someone else might say, well, yeah, but they're just as bad nearly everywhere else. Or someone might say that barging is necessary for industries to stay competitive, while another might say, well, no, it's really not. And for every study that says one thing, there's another study that says the opposite. And so my conclusion is something that I think we can all agree on, and it's that the entire system, including fish, ocean conditions, hydropower generation, navigation, pollution, predation, harvest, hatcheries, habitat, irrigation, and much more, are extraordinarily interconnected. And despite the interconnectedness, we continue to see what I believe is a narrow focus on removing the 4 lower Snake River dams. And going back to what I just said about the endless counterpoint, we simply don't have anything approaching a consensus that breaching the dams would even come close to restoring salmon to the numbers we would like to see. But we do know, however, that it would have an extremely detrimental impact to huge swaths of the Pacific Northwest. Congressman Simpson estimates it would cost over $33 billion to address these impacts, which of course is an awful lot of money. And some would argue that the real costs would be far greater, and that there are less tangible impacts that can never really be compensated for. And so I want to be clear that, at least in my opinion, there are no other options that would have anywhere near the negative impacts that breaching the lower Snake River dams would have. And thinking about it another way, I might consider breaching the dams to be kind of like a Hail Mary pass in football, in that it's a last-ditch effort that stands a pretty good chance of not working. Breaching the dams now would be like throwing a Hail Mary pass, really without even knowing the score. In other words, we don't know if it will achieve what we want it to achieve, but we do know that it's an option that, once exercised, can never be undone. And where the Hail Mary analogy maybe falls short is that in this case, if the Hail Mary doesn't work, the impacts are much worse than just losing a football game. So in summary, because of the extraordinary costs, both measurable and immeasurable, I believe that before removing the dams, we would really need to do two things. First is to exhaust all of our other efforts. And then second is to show in a really definitive way that at least a broad consensus of scientists from the federal and state agencies and tribes can all agree on that removing the dams would actually achieve the desired results. And I don't think we're close on either one of those items yet. I'm not saying by any means that we should just throw up our hands and walk away, or that we are in any way indifferent to the importance of restoring salmon populations. We are committed. But I am saying, though, that we need to broaden our aperture and look at all of the interconnected pieces of this puzzle in a far more meaningful way. And so with that, I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this conversation and look forward to the discussion as we continue.
Thank you, David. Chris Wood, there's a lot, all this to ponder from your point of view. Talk to us about what you've heard and where you think the state of the fish is at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Rocky, and it's good to be back, and good to see David and Sam again too. I think we're all veterans from 2 years ago. And also want to thank the Andrus Center just for hosting this really important conversation. I'd like to begin my remarks today by talking about SARS. And I'm not talking about the respiratory disease. I'm talking about the percentage of juvenile salmon or smolt that survive the ocean and the trek through the dams and then return to spawn. Experts call this the smolt to adult return ratio, hence the acronym SARS. Scientists tell us that we need to rebuild, if we want to rebuild healthy and harvestable populations of fish and the snake, we need at least 4 adult fish to return for every 100 smolts that migrate out to the ocean. Right now in the Yakima Basin, salmon traverse they traverse 4 dams, and they maintain a smolt to adult ratio that's about 2.7 times that of the snake. In the John Day Basin, salmon have to cross 3 dams, and they maintain a smolt to adult ratio it's about almost 4 times what we see in the snake. By the time a salmon in the Snake River crosses their 8th dam, their smolt to adult ratio is actually less than 1%. And lest you think that this is a new trend, over the past 25 years, the Snake Basin has averaged less than 2 adult fish for every 100 smolt. Biologists at the state of Oregon, the state of Idaho, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and various tribes estimate that by taking down the Snake River dams, you'd increase that smolt to adult return ratio by an order of magnitude, 4 times. It's important to remember that right now the Snake Basin currently contains about 20% of all the stream habitat that's occupied by salmon and steelhead on the West Coast. And because of the changing climate and because of the relative elevation and quality habitat in Idaho, by 2080, it's forecast that 65% of the coldest, most climate resilient habitat for cold water fish is going to be in the Snake. the fact is that the snake, despite the condition of the runs now, and I'll mention that in a second, the snake is our best and maybe only hope for a large and wild salmon and steelhead stronghead in the lower 48 states. But that's only if the fish can get there. And they can't right now because of the 4 lower Snake River dams. Since 1995, red counts for salmon nests are called reds in the Middle Fork of the Salmon River Basin average about 3% of their numbers from the 50s and 60s before the dams were built. And by the way, the salmon, the Middle Fork of the salmon, is probably the single most pristine habitat for fish outside of Alaska. We are now faced with a simple choice that Congressman Simpson, I think, has made starkly clear. We can do nothing. It breaks my heart to say this, but right now, the fact is that extinction is the path of least resistance for salmon and steelhead in the Snake River Basin. And I know there will be more litigation, and I have every confidence that the conservation community will continue to prevail in court, because we are breaking the law by allowing these dams to snuff out several species. The fact is that until those 4 dams come down, the fish will continue to decline until they are finally gone. Now, we can continue with these half measures for a few decades. We can have more spill. We can pump out ever more hatchery fish. We can reduce irrigation water. We can have more harvest restrictions. And we've all seen this movie, and we know how it's going to end. The salmon will eventually slip away into extinction. Or we can decide that this won't be the generation. We won't be part of the generation that lets these most magnificent of God's creatures slip away. Congressman Simpson and now Congressman Blumenauer have offered a good faith proposal that could lead to the recovery of salmon and the revitalization of energy development and transportation and transmission in the Pacific Northwest, look at restructuring agriculture and irrigation and community development. Their thinking shows that we can recover salmon and steelhead, as everyone has just agreed to, in a way that lifts all the boats. We can replace the power. We can retrofit for irrigation. We can invest in port communities. We can invest in transportation infrastructure for farmers. Now, the fact is, just in closing, that the Pacific Northwest, by virtue of the experience of the delegation and the positions that they hold, probably is one of the most powerful political delegations in the U.S. Congress right now. And Congressman Simpson and Blumenauer have taken this lead on this issue because they have a great passion for salmon and steelhead. It's obvious when you talk to them. If the people at this conference, the people both on this panel and the people listening, decide that we actually want to work together to bring back these fish with the starting point of removing the 4 lower Snake River dams and making everyone affected better off, socially, economically, and culturally, our other elected leaders in the Pacific Northwest will follow the lead of Congressman Simpson and Blumenauer.
Thank you, Chris. So, Lynda, I'm letting you bat cleanup. You've gotten a chance to hear many people you've talked with and heard from for the last few months in the year. Where are we right now in all of this discussion?
Thank you very much for bringing us together to talk about this crucial issue. And I think since Deb has done such a great job talking about power, and Sam did a great job talking about ag, and David spoke passionately about the economics, and Chris just really hit it out of the park on fish, I'm going to go in a different direction. I want to talk a little bit about history. So I think it's important for the audience listening and for this panel to remember a little something about the Pacific Northwest, which is we've been here before. We've actually got quite a lot of DNA baked into the Pacific Northwest along the lines of a proposal like this. What do I mean by that? This is not our first rodeo. We have in the past very difficult, complex natural resource issues that felt a lot like this one feels right now. Impossible, contentious. And you know what? We fought our way through it. In the Pacific Northwest, we have a tradition, and we have the chops, and we have the history of facing big problems like this together. Remember the Northwest Forest Plan? when we were facing the spotted owl crisis, which really wasn't about the owl at all, was it? It was about whether we were going to cut down the last of the old growth in the Pacific Northwest, or we were going to keep those ancient forests for future generations. And we came together at the Northwest Forest Plan to decide to save those old forests. And we had a roundtable discussion, chaired at that time by President of the United States and the Vice President. I sat there and I watched the mayor of Hoquiam sit down with lawyers from Seattle and timber executives and talk about what this really meant to their communities, what it meant to the future. They sat around that table, they came to some agreements, and they fought their way through it, and they reached an enduring, equitable solution that we live with today. Is it perfect? No. The barred owl came in and took those nests of the spotted owl, so those animals are still declining. Obviously, it's been a difficult transition for timber communities, but those trees were going to go away anyway. And this gave us a chance to help those communities transition with an infusion of cash and assistance to revision their future. And we still have old growth in the Pacific Northwest, and you will have it forever. That wasn't written in the sky. That wasn't a given. That was work that we did together. Look at BC, right across the border, beautiful, natural British Columbia. You know what they're doing right now? They're cutting the very less than 1% of their old growth trees. So their old growth will be gone on this current path if they don't try to do what we already did in the Pacific Northwest, and coming together and reaching what looked to be an almost impossible solution. But we did it. And that was just the first time. We did it again. Let me take you back to the Elwha River, where we built 2 of the largest dams ever, entirely blocking salmon passage back in the early 1900s. Fast forward to the time when the FERC license, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license, was about to expire for those dams. The lower dam never had a license. The upper license was about to expire. And here was Crown Zellerbach Corporation holding the bag for 2 dams that did not meet modern environmental standards, would never be worth the investment to bring them up to modern standards. You had many people working in a mill in Port Angeles powered by those dams, very important high-wage, family-wage jobs. And you had the celebrated run of Elwha Chinook, and in fact, all 5 species of salmon in that river, just about extinct, fighting for their very last breath of life. So once again, the region came together, and in 1992, Congress enacted a legislative solution for the Elwha Fisheries Restoration Act. First ever dam removal of its size, and still the largest ever in the world. This again was a negotiated solution. Even after that legislation passed, people in Port Angeles had doubts. Was this really the right thing? What had really just happened? And so a community conversation was convened, bringing together people from the school board, people from the city neighborhoods to talk about, well, what really was best for the community? And what came out of that process, which was convened by stakeholders to try to figure out what was the best path forward, was the realization that, in fact, this was the best answer, that you would get the fish back, you would keep the jobs, you would replace the power. Does this sound familiar? This process was a community process. People came together, they fought their way through it, and they got through it, and they came to a lasting, equitable solution that today is celebrated around the world as one of the most successful community solutions to a difficult environmental problem anywhere. So here we sit, facing the Columbia Basin fish problem. This is an issue I've been writing about since I worked at the Spokesman Review in 1992. And I remember very well sitting in the newsroom when that decision came down from Judge Malcolm Marsh, calling for a complete overhaul on the river. And I thought, oh, wow, something big is going to happen. Things are going to change. Well, here we sit. 5 federal decisions later, still having this conversation. So, I guess I would just offer as a reporter who feels a little bit like a shrink on the couch at this point after 20 years reporting on this story and then some, that we've been here before as a region, and now we're here again. And I feel that this kind of conversation that's been convened now by the Andrus Center for the second time, thank you for that, the kinds of conversations that are happening in tribal governments, that are happening in the halls of Congress, that are happening in communities and in public power offices all over the region. This is a conversation that we've been through before and that we know how to have. We've done it before. It's a good sign that we're doing it again. I would add one more point, which is, change is possible. we've seen that ourselves. We've executed change, and we're doing it right now on the river. Did you know that right now we are actually spilling 80, even 90% of the flow of the mighty Columbia over those dams? I can remember very clearly that we said very recently to one another, oh, you can't spill that much water. Bonneville will go broke, or it won't work anyway. The fish will blow up with gas bubble disease. Can't do it, won't do it, shouldn't do it. Well, we're doing it. We're doing it right now. And no one's noticed, right? I mean, your power is humming along. The fish, as a matter of fact, the little baby fish, as long as my finger, have been crashing over those spillways without blowing up with gas bubble disease. And it's incredible to me that the Corps of Engineers is able to operate those dams with such finesse that they can literally have dams spilling as much as 80, 90% of their flow in some hours of the day in order to help push these fish to sea. That's something we said we couldn't do as recently as 5 years ago, and we're doing it. We won't know until the adult fish come back whether that's helping them enough. My point simply is we're doing it, and we said we couldn't do it rather recently. So I want to end on a hopeful note that we've seen this movie before, and it came out well. So thank you for putting in the time and the work this morning, and I look forward to watching this conversation one more time.
Thank you, Lynda. So this is a question from the audience that I'm going to start with Debra, but several others may want to weigh in. What do you see are the implications for public power and Bonneville Power Administration if we don't develop a solution that works for salmon and stabilizes the cost?
So I think for Bonneville, first of all, Bonneville, for anyone who isn't aware, is our public power's primary wholesale provider of power. So City Light, for instance, we purchase about 40% of our power needed to serve load from Bonneville. We generate about 40% of it on our own projects, and the remaining 20% is either is primarily longer term contracts and or market purchases. So, the utility I worked at before was what's called a full requirements utility. So Central Lincoln, being a small rural utility, purchased all of its power from Bonneville. So there's a wide range of relationships, but no matter, most of us in the Northwest are dependent on Bonneville for a good chunk of, if not all, of our resource. And Bonneville right now has primary responsibility through the Northwest Power Act and the Northwest Power and Conservation Council to, one, market that power, but two, manage the fish obligations that come about as a result of operating the dams that are owned by the Corps and the Bureau. So. You mentioned, or I think, I can't remember who mentioned in the opening, the amount of money that we spend, that Bonneville customers have spent on fish. And most folks in the public power community would suggest that it's not that folks don't want to spend money on fish, by the way. It's that folks want, in general, in my industry, we want to spend money that results in measurable improvements, and we want it to be a good investment. We sometimes wonder whether the model that exists today is the best model for ensuring that the investment that Bonneville makes, which is funded by our, at the end of the day, is funded by our retail customers, whether it's getting the results that we all want. And I think in general, and then go back to Chris's comments, I think it's a good argument to say that it's not. And the fact that there is continued litigation and we lost in court a number of times would indicate that we're not getting the results we need. So I think the issue is often on the power side. And I hate to use the word sides because I actually think we're all on the same side. And I really think we're all on the side of, watershed recovery, species recovery. But I think the concern is that money will just keep flowing. We won't get the results we want. The costs will continue to go up. And I think, as David mentioned, and we will still not have healthy species. And so I think, David, you hit the nail on the head with your comment, and I can come at that two different ways. You made the comment that, is it too late to, if you did breach, is it too late to have the species recovery? And if that in fact is the Hail Mary pass at the very end of the game and we miss, what are the implications? I am able, let me put it this way, I am able to put on Chris's hat, which actually in my life is Rob Masonis's hat, because, he and I have spent a lot of time together, to understand that if nothing else has worked, then, and if the goal is species recovery, I can understand why the environmental and conservation community goes to breach, because if in fact the most important thing is to maintain these essential species, then you're going to want to do everything you possibly can to, or try everything you possibly can before you declare anything too late. And so I can get on both sides of that, and I understand. And at the end of the day, I think the fundamental question that I ask, Rocky, is who should pay? So let me throw this out, and then I'll stop. But I remember where I was. I'm sure probably everybody on this call does. I remember where I was when Judge Simon's ruling was issued in 2016. And, it still resonates with me. And it resonates in my real job today, because I'm involved in relicensing right now on the Skagit River. And so what it says is that, climate change is real. Warming oceans are impacting fish, and they are. And it is no longer enough to just mitigate for the impacts of dams if, in fact, the goal is to recover a species. And so, when you go there, the question is, who should pay those costs? Aren't those societal costs? For instance, we hear about rising water levels in Florida and other parts of the country. At some point, as climate change and our conversation about that continues, we're going to all be dealing with that reality as well. People who build homes in places where they will lose them, and if we don't do something, we will lose life, we will lose property, it will be incredibly expensive. And I suspect those will be borne as societal costs. So sometimes what I wonder is if we're approaching this issue incorrectly, because we're putting all of the burden, the growing burden, on electric utility ratepayers, when in fact some of these are the result of just plain climate change and impacts, and who should pay for them. I didn't really answer your question, Rocky, but it's what I think about all the time.
Chris, I was going to ask you that who pays the cost. If the judge rules later this year that the biological opinion is once again illegal, as you believe, that's going to be a different cost than the cost of the Simpson-Blumenauer plan, right?
Yeah, maybe. Rocky, I think I think we're going to keep winning in the courts, and we're going to keep losing in the river. For the reason I mentioned earlier, these fish they're slowly going extinct, and we have federal laws that are supposed to stop that. We've spent $18 billion, I think it is now, on the least successful salmon restoration plan in the history of the known world. Whatever we're doing now isn't working. We have to do something different, and that's what's so admirable about Congressman Simpson and now Blumenauer, is that they're looking at this issue from a different way, not from the fish side, but how do we recover this species from going extinct while also lifting up all the boats and making sure all the potentially affected interests would come out of this better off than they were before. It's a very novel way of looking at it.
So I kind of get back to this. We've had this discussion for a long time. We've, for the last 2 years, we have focused on the what if. I am, David, the Tri-Cities under the Simpson plan has a whole lot of money mitigation, so to speak. out there, but it doesn't necessarily seem to be anything that's very attractive to folks in the Tri-City. Am I reading that correct? Is that more money for Pacific Northwest Lab, a new port facility to move the ports down to there, and other economic development money is not really look like it's offsetting the impacts. Is that accurate?
I think first I should start by saying that I think, very much appreciate the approach that Congressman Simpson has taken in putting this plan together, in that he has recognized that there are some very significant impacts across the Pacific Northwest. And I feel like he's really made a good faith effort to try to address all of those. Obviously, I think there would need to be many more conversations to come to really make sure that that is correct, or to better understand what the impacts would be and how to completely compensate for them if it's at all possible. So again, I appreciate the approach that he has taken, at least in that respect, and trying to make that comprehensive proposal or concept. And I think in some respects, you could argue that there are a lot of things in his concept that would be very good for the Tri-Cities, whether it would be the national lab being sort of the hub for a lot of the work, or the other investments. And I think in some respects, it speaks to the belief in the Tri-Cities, especially where there are maybe a lot of looking at it from a very myopic Tri-City centric point of view, that maybe this would be good for the Tri-Cities. But I think myself and others believe that it's still just not the best policy. It's just not the right approach, regardless of whether it might have some benefits in the short or medium or long term, specifically for the Tri-City area, for our region. There's other things that we can and should be doing instead. And so, again, I think there are many elements of Congressman Simpson's plan that we know that we need to do regardless of whether the dams are there or not. We know that our region, and Debra can probably speak to this much better than me, but we know that our region is going to need many more gigawatts of new power. And we know that we have a challenge. We don't want to be in a position like Texas or California, where we don't have enough power in the coldest of the winter days or the hottest of the summer months. And so we have some big challenges that will require some very big investments, regardless of the dams. And so, again, I think it's a conversation that we should continue to have, and appreciate the good faith approach to this from Congressman Simpson. But I think we maybe need to be realistic about the real source of the challenge facing us. If it is ocean conditions, if we do recognize that, across the entire Pacific coast from Alaska to California, we're seeing some very tough numbers for salmon, including in dammed and undammed rivers. If we do wonder, my understanding is that there's 13 listed species of salmon in the Pacific Northwest. 4 of those are on the Snake River, and we've invested 17 or 18 billion. I don't know, but how much have we invested in the other 9 species? And so it seems like, again, that we have this focus on the Snake River dams, and that conversation is certainly important, but it's part of, in my opinion, a larger conversation that I don't feel like we're having as comprehensively as I think we should.
So, Sam, I've got a lot of questions here from folks talking about maybe different. Are there different ways we can get the grain downriver? Some people are suggesting creating a grain pipeline. Now, I remember many ideas about the idea of having a fish pipeline. So I immediately get a little bit skeptical, but is that actually a serious kind of an issue? Or are there people talking about, gee, we've got to come up with different approaches that I'm not even thinking about? What do you think about all that?
Well, thanks, Rocky. And I don't know how to answer that, because I think that's probably on the technology side, that it would be something that you don't know about, I don't know about, but that somebody would bring to us in the future. there's people out there a lot smarter than me that are doing some fantastic things. Look at look at Elon Musk and space travel and what we're doing there. So is there some way, whether it's a pipeline, I think I've even thrown that out there as but it seems a little far-fetched because it's not just my farmer's grain in Genesee. There's my competitors. There's, a dozen other companies up and down the system that, you can't really, I guess you could commingle it, but it becomes hard to separate. But I'm not saying that there's not something out there and that we need to continue to look. I think we do. It's the rail is stressed right now to handle everything so we need to find something. And I think we just continue to keep looking. But I don't think it's this magical pipeline that, it's kind of like a water spigot. You turn it on and you get water, you shut it off and it stops. Grain just doesn't really flow like that. But I think there is maybe some technology in the future.
So this question comes from somebody in the audience. It goes to Chris Wood, but again, I might pass her on. Lynda, you certainly have followed this as well. Has anybody had any discussions with the Biden administration? And what are we haven't? It doesn't seem like we've heard any response of putting this into Build Back Better.
Well, I think you're jumping the gun on that. I'd stay tuned on that, and I just think it's a little soon to reach that conclusion. And I do want to make sure we surface a point in this panel discussion that I don't think we've talked about, which is where we stand right now. That was your initial question to me, Rocky. And, we stand at a very unique nexus of time. Whether you're talking about the people who are in the Northwest delegation at this point, we have never had such a powerful delegation, ever. And it's, for some of them, legacy time because they've been in office for a very long time. That's point number one. Point number two, we have an administration that's clearly swinging for the fences, and they've got 2 years basically to do whatever they're going to try to do. And they're moving on a very big scale, I think, sort of shocking people, actually. And there's a proposal at this point from Congressman Simpson to put a big old chunk of change on the table to actually be leveraged to solve the kinds of problems that David's talked about, that Sam has talked about, that Deborah's talked about. That's a once in a lifetime opportunity, period. I mean, if you don't have that kind of money sitting there in a title in the infrastructure bill, even if the legislation doesn't get worked out for another year or two, if you don't have that money sitting there in this bill, I don't know when you think you're ever going to get it again. And you can't just kind of wander onto the national stage as the Northwest, period, alone by yourself, looking for $33 billion. That's not going to happen. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of where we are in this particular moment. We have a delegation that's more powerful than anything we've seen since the days of Scoop. We have a big sack of money that's being proposed as at least a title in a larger bill in a national lift. And we have fish that are in the tank. I mean, I've been covering this a long time, not since the crash of 1994 when all the fisheries were shut down on the West Coast, have I heard scientists say the things that I'm hearing them say. So make no mistake, this is a singular moment. And, it may feel like kind of a lightning bolt, big rush, too much to do in too little time, just getting through pandemic. But honestly, this moment will not come again, politically or with access to this kind of money to solve really big generational problems that need to be solved anyway.
Yeah, just to add on to Lynda's really wise comments there, Rocky. So the administration, we have been talking to the administration. Dinesh Persson, Chairman Wheeler personally, has been also in those conversations, doing a great job. But, to underscore what Lynda just said, we pulled out of the litigation on the Snake River, I think 12 years ago, I pulled us out. And because it was difficult, we thought this was a totally tractable problem, but it's difficult to say, hey, how can we figure out what you need? And we'll talk to you about what science tells us the fish need when we were litigating. And part of the problem with collaboration is that in the end, if there's no resources to accomplish the objectives that you want to accomplish, you're just having a nice conversation with people, which is important, right? That's good for society, but it's not going to resolve issues. We have a chance now to have a $33 billion solution that we can all sit down and figure out over time. And, that's not going to come around again. $33 billion is a lot of money. When it's part of a $1.9 trillion package, it's easy to miss it. But we're never going to get a standalone piece of legislation for $33 billion for the Pacific Northwest, no matter how powerful their delegation is.
Deborah, what do you say to that?
I just wanted to jump in and say, I think you guys just touched on an important piece that is making this conversation challenging. I come to the conversation understanding, and, I've always been someone who believes in having plan A, plan B, and maybe plan C. And so I'm not personally put off by the fact that some parties have chosen to file while they've been engaged in the conversation. I know some of my peers feel very differently. And I think, and so you've just called it, it's very hard to sustain this place of really commitment to collaboration and to conversation and to dialogue when folks are also having to take actions that on the surface at least feel oppositionally opposed to that. And I don't know the answer because, again, I understand why people need to preserve rights. And I think I do think, Lynda, one of the things that is singular about this moment is there is a profound, even the folks who have filed, generally there's a profound wish that wasn't necessary. I think there is a clear understanding that the past has not served us. The past actions have not served us. They've certainly not served the fish. That the discussion is about that. And David, you're right. There's all kinds of issues around technology, baseload resource adequacy. A lot of those are things that I believe will take care of. They won't take care of themselves. I shouldn't say it that way, but there are paths and there are technologies that are going to emerge and that are going to become, just this week, the first grid scale wave energy project, right? So, I mean, we are in a period of profound technological breakthrough and opportunity, and we don't have the time to wait for all of the technologies to play out in order to take actions that will serve the fish and the species. And so, it is this thing around, can we collaborate and litigate at the same time? Who thinks we can? I'm curious. Yeah, it's hard. And so, and I'm an Oregonian who lives in Washington. And so I have, and then my kids live in Montana. So I'm pretty clear on the various dynamics at play in this 4-state conversation, which also makes it really, really hard.
Well, we are nearing time to wrap up. Does anybody have any final thoughts? Short? Well, one of the things
let me say one thing then, Rocky. We are at, as everyone has said, I don't know how we move this forward. A month ago, I would have sworn it would be gone by now. It does not seem to be going that way. Well, that was based on what I was seeing and what I was hearing. And I do think, I don't know if it's because of Representative Blumenauer or other efforts, but there has been some new life breathed into the concept. And whether the concept goes forward or not, what I really hope, and I'm going to end it the way I started it, is that we do not walk away from the conversation and the stated need for collaboration. So whether we do it as part of Congressman Simpson's proposal, whether we do it as part of the Columbia Basin Collaborative, some of you, Sam, I think others said you're having informal conversations. Whatever the forum is, it's the conversations that we need to continue to have without going to our corners. So that's what I'll say.
What do you think, David? Do you think these conversations can move forward in the form of this Simpson proposal, or is it got to be separate?
I think the Simpson proposal, I do believe it helps to move the conversation forward. It opens up maybe a different sort of dialogue. And I kind of reflect back on, I was asked kind of a similar question 2 years ago, and where I think maybe one of the fundamental challenges of this dialogue is you have a group of people who frankly don't feel comfortable coming to the table unless dam removal is on the table. And you have a group of people who don't feel comfortable coming to the table as long as dam removal is on the table. And I'm still not sure how we bridge that gap. Because people are pretty dug in. Some folks believe that you got to remove the dams, and other folks feel like you really can't. It doesn't make sense. And so I think, again, having Congressman Simpson's proposal out there as a point of discussion and something to maybe generate some momentum on this larger, more comprehensive dialogue. And I would like to see the comprehensive the dialogue expand to beyond just the Snake River dams. And we obviously know we have some big challenges with sea lions, with ocean conditions, with carbon emissions. And there are some really big challenges that might be, maybe some folks might think are kind of outside the scope of the Pacific Northwest. And maybe that's the case, but I'm hopeful that the conversation can move forward and that people can, I guess, if we can figure out a way to maybe thread that needle and bring the parties together, but it's not going to be easy. We know that it's not been easy for the last few decades, but it's a worthwhile conversation to continue.
Chris?
Yeah, just a comment on David's good thoughts there. I would be remiss not to do this as an advocate, David, forgive me. But the key to predation, the key to the over-reliance on hatcheries is removing the dams. The predation, it is the thing that unlocks the potential of the Snake River Basin to be that stronghold for salmon and steelhead in 20, 30 years when we're dealing with climate change. The dams exacerbate all of those problems that you just mentioned. Salmon have been living through varying ocean conditions for millennia. We're in a several-year surge where it's bad. Yeah, I know it's bad, but it's been bad before, and they always come back. The problem with the Snake River salmon is they're not coming back. They're on a trend that's right down to the ground.
Well, this has been a really good discussion. I find that the more and more we keep talking like this, the more people are coming up with new ideas. Some new technology comes along, as Deborah just told us about. But our history has been, as Lynda said, a way to work this stuff out. So it will be, it's going to be we're going to see a whole lot here. We've seen a lot in 2 years. We're going to see a lot more here in the next, we only have about 2 years for the salmon. And we've got a lot of transition going on in, frankly, our entire economy. So I want to thank all 5 of you for joining me here. And we will be moving on to a break.